And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today, we are talking about day 2 of training camp for the Washington Commanders. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we're talking about day 2 of training camp for the Washington Commanders. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of everything here. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the interviews and just really paraphrasing what was said there. And then next, we're going to talk about the key standouts here from day 2 of training camp for the Commanders. And so let's start with Dan Quinn and what he had to say to the press before practice started here. And so the first point that I got out of what he said was talking about what he was looking for in day 1. And so he said that he wanted to see how the new Commanders, who are vets, fit in with the rest of the football team in day 1. And so this is huge because when we talk about standards and what it means to be a Commander, you've heard it from Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. And really, when they go to add somebody, they want to make sure that they're adding somebody that fits the Commander's standards. So we know that this is extremely important with Dan Quinn and really how he shapes this football team. And so thought it was interesting that that was point number 1 that he wanted to bring up here. Next, he's asked about building the culture and sustaining it. And so I thought that this was a great point here because he feels like that when you are building your culture, that is kind of what leads to sustaining it. And so he says that the culture is what you do every day. It's the way that you go about things, pretty much go about your business there. And he was talking about that when you're sustaining, your culture and everything like that, it's about going out there and reinforcing it and making sure that it is something that is serious and that it sticks. And so, just kind of paraphrasing that, but you get some good insights here as to what Dan Quinn is talking about with building the culture of this football team. I think that this is really what makes this team so special, is just the identity that this team has. And so next, I thought another key point here was when he was talking about the line to scrimmage here, because he was asked about getting the line to scrimmage better. And he felt like that if you have the line to scrimmage good on both sides, so offensively and defensively, you have a chance to be in every fight. And look, that is absolutely true. I'm right there with them because look, at the National Football League, you can look at all the points scored and, all these pass plays and it looks pretty and everything else. But the bottom line is that you have got to be able to dominate the line of scrimmage. Offensively, you have got to be able to move people out of the way to where you can get to where you need to, whether it's the first down marker or getting over the goal line. And so absolutely, it starts with the line of scrimmage. And really, every time we were talking about it post game, when the Washington Commanders were able to dominate the time of possession, that usually worked out well for the Washington Commanders. And I do think that that is something they are going to have to lean on a lot this year, especially with the amount of blitzes that they are going to face. That teams are going to try to get dynamic and come after Jaden Daniels. How do you slow that down? You run the football. How do you keep an opposing quarterback off the field? Well, you've got to be able to run the football, which means that you've got to dominate up front there. And defensively, look, if the Commanders can figure out a way to dominate defensively up front, this team is certainly headed back to the Super Bowl, because if they can find a way to get through the opposing offensive line and start to get that early penetration, to stop some of these running plays and things like that before they start, that is going to be huge for the Commanders. And so absolutely, the line to scrimmage is how you are going to win the fight in the National Football League. And so next key point, he talks about Marshawn Lattimore. And I love this because he's essentially saying that he's off to a good start. And so there's been a lot of noise around Marshawn Lattimore, people thinking, hey, was this a good acquisition for the Washington Commanders? I've been all about let's wait and see with Marshawn Lattimore. I still think that he has a ton left in the tank, and I just think that it was unfortunate last season. He was coming in with the hamstring injury, and I can tell you, just as a runner, having hamstring injuries are not the greatest thing. They need some time to rehab that properly, and so I can only imagine in the National Football League, when you are trying to guard a wide receiver, you have no idea where they're going. You have to be able to make the cuts and, explode out of those cuts and things like that. He just wasn't able to do so. And then on top of that, coming into a new defense, you have to learn the terminology. You have to learn the audibles, the checks, the hand signals, and everything else like that. And so that might be easy, from the outside, looking in. But when you're in the midst of the season and then you're also dealing with an injury, I think that definitely slowed down Marshon Lattimore last season. So the fact that he has said earlier in the mandatory minicamps that he feels great, now you're hearing this from Coach Dan Quinn. I think that this is huge for the secondary, which I think has a real chance to turn the football over this year, because with Marshon Lattimore and the way that he goes about his business, and you look at Trey Amos and the way that he goes about his business, those two corners can be very sticky. They can be pretty nasty coming up in the run game, and I think that gives us a bit of an identity there. And I also love the fact that we have Jonathan Jones in the mix, and there's the real chance that Mikey Sainristil is going to step up here in year two, and he's also inside, which is his natural position. And so this secondary can be awfully scary for the Washington Commanders, and so we'll see how it works out. So next, I wanted to go ahead and talk about Von Miller. And so Von Miller got a chance to talk to the press here after practice. And so just to also put out there, Von Miller actually had a vet day today. He did not practice along with Laramie Tunsil and Noah Brown, and so those guys got rest. But Von Miller, man, he gave us some great insights here. And so just paraphrasing this, but the first thing that I thought was funny was when Von Miller was talking about being out of football for 4 months, essentially, because he didn't have a team. And so he was like, man, I missed not having the OTAs and stuff like that to go to. And so that was funny to hear. It's great to hear that, from a professional, right? Like he loves to do obviously what he's doing, which is playing in the National Football League. And so next, he was talking about, just what he's bringing here and why he came, and talking about winning it and how it's all about this team going out there and winning, and how he's a winner on and off the field here. And so he knows that, look, they're going to go through some adverse situations, but that is really what reveals character. And so I love that insight that we got from Von Miller there. And then I really love this one. This was another moment in which I was definitely laughing on this, but he was like, look, I can still rush the passer. He was like, they brought me here to let me rush. That's what I do. I can roll out of bed at 36 and rush the passer. So I love that. I love that confidence here with Von Miller. And we've talked about that stat. Look, he had one of the best, getting off the football stats that you can have, and also to his pressure rate at the age that he's at. Von Miller is awfully effective still. And so I'm looking forward to seeing him get turned loose here with this defense, hopefully causing some chaos out there. Next, he talked a little bit more about just, playing football and how he's played for 25 years and everything else like that. He can still get off the ball quick. He still got the twitch and everything else. And he said that, you don't want to be in a situation where you get kicked out the league, and you also don't want to be in a situation where you leave the league too early. And so he wants to maximize this time as he feels like he's in the sweet spot. Another thing that he talked about too is how, it's interesting training with Coach Ryan Kerrigan. And he was talking about how both of those guys, or they both trained together coming into the National Football League. And so he said that Kerrigan helped him get some more reps on the bench press. And he was talking about just how big, Kerrigan was. And I can tell you, I got a chance to watch Kerrigan up close in a game. And man, yeah, he was. And so he was a monster out there. And so talking about him and how he's being coached up by him. And so he thought that that was funny. And then next, he's talking about just his experience now, and just what he's saying as far as like how, he's going to be playing out there. And he broke it down like if you're playing basketball and you're coming in and now he's just a 3-point shooter. So he's talking about the fact that he's not in a situation where it's an every down type of game for him, where he used to be able to go out there and like kind of set up the offensive lineman or whoever the case may be he's going against to set them up for moves later in the football game. He said that now he comes out there, he's got to be shooting the three every time he comes out there, which means he's going for the home run play. And so I thought that was funny to hear from Von Miller. And then next, he talks about when he's getting in the game and talking about how he will need to make those plays to hopefully get the strip sacks, the fumbles, and things like that can really turn around a football game, for your team. And so I love hearing that insight from Von Miller. And he felt like that he's known Dan Quinn really all his career, felt like players that have played for him, coaches that have been around Dan Quinn have told him so much. And so that was good insight to hear from Von Miller. But once again, he was out due to a vet day today. And so next, I wanted to jump over to what Brandon Colman had to say. And so Brandon Colman, he gave us a couple insights here. And so with Brandon Colman, I think one of the key takeaways that he was talking about in his interview was he was talking about like pad level, and he was talking about how that's going to be huge for him. Obviously, you don't want to have high pad level here when you're going against a defense here, because that means that they're going to have some leverage here on you. And so he's got to make sure that he continues to work on that. So he talked about that. And he talked about Josh Conley Jr., and he raved about how he is a student of the game. And so I love hearing that. I think that we've heard that numerous times about Josh Conley Jr. And being a first-round pick, the fact that he is a sponge right now and he's going out there and he's holding his own for what we're hearing. And so it sounds good for Josh Conley Jr. Let's see if he can play himself into just really a major role in year one. Next, for him, another thing that I thought was key was he was talking about the speed of the game has slowed down. And this goes into what Dan Quinn was talking about with these players going into year two, is the fact that the game starts to slow down for you. And so everything's still going fast, but it's slowed down for you. And so we are going to need that from Brandon Colman. He's going to be working inside right now. He's got Tyler Biotis, and then he's also got Laramie Tunsil, I believe, that are going to be next to him in that offensive line. And so he did talk about communication there and being comfortable inside. And so it sounds like that Brandon Colman is off to a great start, and I think that he's going to have a very good year too. And so next, let's go ahead and let's jump into just really some of the key takeaways from practice here and some of the standouts. And so if you want to go see this, you can head over to Commander's Wire, and you can actually see the video clips here of these players that we're going to talk about. But the first player that was mentioned here within this article is Ja'Cory Brooks. And so once again, Ja'Cory Brooks, it seems like had a very good day in day two here. And so one of the mentions about him in today's write-up was that he was working, I guess, after practice, staying a long time after practice, getting more reps with Mariota, and then also to Josh Johnson out there. So that was good to see. And I've been talking about Brooks a lot. I think that he was, to me, he was one of the most exciting undrafted free agents that I was looking to see, because, he's coming over from Louisville. He also played for the University of Alabama. I talked about how he was terrific in special teams for them, punts, kickoffs. He blocked a punt over there as well. He's terrific with the deep threats. He's great at contested catches. I talked about the stat that he's had. And so at 6'3", 195, if there is a wide receiver position open, I think that Ja'Cory Brooks is going to be right there as far as penciling his name in. And so he is a name definitely that you want to continue to watch. He was a guy that I was looking forward to seeing here. I think that the issue here that you wonder about with him, I think coming in, he had a 4.65 40 speed. But I said this, just looking at his film, he looks a lot faster when he's playing out there. And so that's all that matters. And so let's see what happens here with Ja'Cory Brooks, as he looked good here once again. Next, Chris Moore. And so they talk about Chris Moore here. And so it's Zach Selby, who writes for the commanders.com over there. And he said that he caught a touchdown in the 7-on-7s here with Jaden Daniels today. And so Chris Moore, 32, a bit of a journeyman here in the National Football League. He signed a futures contract in January with the Washington Commanders, but it looks like he's been getting some reps here. Terry McLaurin, we've been talking about him in his absence, but so far he's looking pretty good. And so in this article, it says that he does pretty much a lot of the things that Zacchaeus did for us last season. And so maybe another wide receiver to watch here, depending on what the roster is going to look like. These two players are showing some flashes early. Next, Tyree Jackson. And so a 6'7" former quarterback turned tight end. And so we are not strangers to that. Remember Logan Thomas. He was also a quarterback that turned into a tight end. And so Tyree Jackson looks like that he's been looking good pretty so far in the first couple of days. And what is talked about here within this article is that he might be battling Yankoff there for the final spot. And so maybe it comes down to special teams, but at 6'7", maybe a guy that you look for in the red zone. And so that's another guy that has shown some flashes here. And then next, another player that was talked about here was Trey Amos. And so within this article, if you go over there, there is a clip of Trey Amos, and man, he looked very good. So it looked like that they were doing like a drill where he's shadowing a player, and then he has to go and locate the football, and he looked quick. You could see the quick twitch in there. Definitely you see the ball skills and everything else. Like Trey Amos looks like that's the guy. And so I think that Trey Amos really has a chance to be a starter for the Washington Commanders from day one. I continue to say that. I think that out of all our rookies, I think that Trey Amos might have the most immediate path to be a starter. So let's see what happens. But once again, head over there to that article and you can see the actual clips of these players here. And so those were our standouts today. And before we jump out of here, once again, Noah Brown was out due to a vet day. You had Laramie Tunsil. He didn't practice as well. Von Miller as well, too. He had a vet day. And so those were the players that were out. We talked about the standouts. And one more mention, too, is Jaden Daniels. And so I did see a clip with him. And, man, he looked great with his footwork. He was kind of going through some cones and everything else, and then he throws the football through the net. And so he looked awfully sharp there, and he looks like, man, he's got some good pocket presence here. And so I cannot wait to see this once they start to ramp up and put the pads on. But this is day 2 for the Washington Commanders, the key takeaways here. So let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking about as far as the key takeaways. Once again, we talked about Trey Amos, him looking good, couple wide receivers looking good in Chris Moore and Ja'Cory Brooks. And then also, too, Tyree Jackson, tight end, 6'7". So maybe a guy that you want to take a look at here as far as a player that could maybe make it onto the roster here and maybe be a nice red zone target for the Washington Commanders. And so we'll be talking about a little bit more as training camp goes on. And as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.